Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And I'm so excited today because I'm talking with another member of the C-Suite network. And I always like talking with people from C-Suite because it is such a great organization. Little plug here, c-suitenetwork.com. Check it out. Okay, so please join me today in welcoming Ed Muzio to our program today. Welcome, Ed. How are you doing?
Hi, Deb. Great. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have time with you. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we will dive into this because we're going to be talking about something today that is very interesting and pertains to everybody. So best-selling author Ed Muzio is one of very few management consultants in the world who does systems-level group work with CEOs and their executive staffs simultaneously, helping leadership teams shift culture across the entire organization. His work has been hailed for producing substantive changes, even in the most challenging circumstances, with results in weeks or months instead of years. Ed has been called one of the planet's clearest thinkers on management practice by the editor of an international business magazine. Originally trained as an engineer, Ed started organizations and led global initiatives prior to starting his firm, Group Harmonics. That was almost 20 years ago. Today, he's an advisor and influencer, serving small startups all the way up to Fortune 500s. He is the author of Iterate, Run a Fast, Flexible, Focused Management Team, and he's here to talk with us today about how the most effective organizations are run and how that's different from so many of what we were actually taught, or so much about what we were taught about management. So again, Ed, welcome.
Great, Deb. Thanks for having me here. It's great.
Perfect. Well, I always like to find out from my guests how it is that they got to where they are today. So tell us a little bit more about this process.
I'm a little bit of a strange one, I think, in my world, because I did start out as an engineer. So I worked for Intel back in the sort of mid to late 90s and early 2000s at a time when Intel was sort of doing a thing that nobody else was doing. And so there was no such thing back then as a computer chip person.
Right.
So they just hired different kinds of engineers and then taught us how to do it. And so, it was fast growth. And it was sort of one of these worlds where everyone changed jobs internally every year and a half. And people, if you found something useful to do it, and it would help the company if you did it, they were happy to have you do it. And so we all kind of found our own way in some way, I think more so than you might in a more established company, right? Because it was just growing so fast. And so I pretty quickly became kind of a weird one as an engineer, because I was always the guy who was like looking at, how are we using authority on this team? Or like, how are we making decisions? Or those kind of things.
Why the heck are we doing it this
way?
Why
are we doing it this way? And why is it us? And is there a better way for us to work? And so, I would dive into the spreadsheets and geek out when I needed to, but it seemed like I was the only one looking at that stuff. And so as my career kind of advanced, I moved in that direction. And I ultimately ended up first attending and then helping facilitate and teach a week-long development program for middle management. And as part of that process, I met the man who ultimately became my mentor, who had worked for 20 years before that on those kinds of questions from the outside. And so when I left the company to do my own consulting, I teamed up with him, and for a while we just sort of collaborated. And then after, I don't know, 5 or 10 years or so, we did a transition where I took on his business and his IP and put it all together. And the way he sort of explained this to me is, he didn't put it on the open market. He said, it's going to be you, and here's how we're going to do this. It was really quite a humbling thing. But what he said was, you've been on the inside of companies that work this way, and I've been on the outside. So you're going to have an ability to both know the model and also kind of feel and understand when it's happening or not. And that I didn't, when smart people tell you things, you don't know what they mean for a while. It took me a couple
It's got to kind of cogitate.
Yeah, it took me a couple years, and I woke up one day doing a full implementation with an executive team and went, oh, that's what he meant. Because I was sitting there going, this isn't it. Why isn't it? And so I I end up going to the model for the answer of why isn't this it, as opposed to sort of putting the model in everyone's face. And that has proven very effective in these highly complex scenarios of like working with the whole executive team all at once on how they run their entire company.
Right.
So yeah, and now I'm still an ex-engineer in some ways. I still have spreadsheets for things that I do, but I'm more of a systems guy, and I'm a guy that looks at sort of, I don't look at individual people in the sense of why did that person do that? What's wrong with them? I look at people and go, that person is not bringing information. What about the system is sort of
right? Yeah.
right. So I become
It's not that they didn't do it; it's that the system didn't. It needs fixed.
Right. And not to say that one individual can't need help sometimes, but that everyone understands that North American culture is very clear on individuality. Like we all know we can do things, but we tend to miss the systemic influences, and that's where I think that's why I think what I'm doing is different than most of what's going on, because I'm actually working at a system level with the executive teams.
Right. Yeah. And this is so interesting. And I'm out of corporate America. I've been out of corporate America for quite a long time. But, all of this pertains, as we said, to anything. Anytime you've got more than a person who's doing something, then this comes into play. So, I mentioned that you wrote a book, and hold it up, Bivana. And so for those of you who are listening, the book is called Iterate, Run a Fast, Flexible, Focused Management Team. So let's talk about, first of all, what do you mean by iterate?
Well, iterate is, it's not my concept, obviously, but it's this idea. You hear it in sort of agile project management. You hear it in software development. I actually first learned it in engineering school, iterative sort of solutions to problems. So where you can't figure out the end state directly. So like weather modeling, for example, or traffic pattern modeling, what the computer does is it takes one step from a complex set of parameters, and then it calculates out that step and then takes the next step. And so to iterate, I always use the in the management space, the metaphor of walking to the car. Like you head out the door of the parking lot of the mall or office building, and you look out to where you think your car is. You're not really sure, and you look at your watch. I got to get to my car in 3 minutes to stay on schedule. And you start to take steps, and you don't get out a map and chart your course. What you do is you take the most reasonable step you think you can take from right here. And then as you go along, the steps bring information. And some of that information is bottom up, like is the surface slippery or not? And that causes changes in the resources of your leg muscles. And some of the information is top down, like that's not my car, I need to turn. Or
don't walk into that pole.
Don't hit that pole, right? And so what's happening is every step brings information, and every next step is the best next step in light of all the information, including the newest information.
Right.
And so that's very different than, what I call North American management, where it's like we make a plan in January, and then we have meetings all year to talk about how the plan is going. And as we go into February, the difference between reality and what we're talking about in the meetings is getting wider, because the plan is no longer right, but there's no language to adjust that. So instead, we spend our meetings trying to make it look like things are going okay. And then we spend our time between the meetings trying to hurry up and do the work so that for the next meeting, we look okay.
Right.
And so to iterate is instead to say, we're heading for this. And at this moment, it looks like we're heading here. And so we should make a decision today to affect that future and implement that decision. And then we'll revisit that if we need to and as we need to, because we understand that we can't see the future. And so it's a more realistic view. If you're listening to this on video, you can see in my back corner there, my "We Love Reality" sticker. This is something I give executives when we have these conversations about, like, we bring as much reality as we can, and then we make decisions, and we just take the next best step that we can from here. In light of all the information we have over and over again. That's what it means to iterate.
Well, and what I love about this is we've all been in situations, and I don't care if it's your family or a volunteer group or a big company, small company, whatever, where we said, why are we doing it this way? And the response we get back is, because this is the way it's always been done.
Right.
And, and in many cases, that actually does work, right? But it also, in many cases, isn't working well, as you said, or needs adjusting. And we get caught in that we can't do that type of thing, because this is the way we've always done it. We've also all been in those companies where somewhere on the bookshelf behind us, there was our policies and procedures manual. Right? You do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And nowhere in there does it address what happens if type of thing.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You're talking about, what we often refer to in my world as corporate culture, right?
Right.
And the most clear thinking I've seen about corporate culture was from Edgar Schein from Sloan, who we think invented the term. And he basically said, look, either the we in this room or the we before us, had problems,
Right.
and we solved them. And in the course of solving them, we stumbled on behaviors and habits that worked.
Right.
And so now we teach those things back and forth to each other as the way it is and the way we should think and feel about things today. And so today's culture is really just a manifestation of these behavioral habits of the system.
Right.
And so, like you said, in some ways that's good. I always say like the body puts breathing and heartbeat into the subconscious systems, right? You're not consciously in charge of breathing because you might forget. Right. So
yeah, you get so caught up in whatever you're watching.
You might not do it. Right. So, it's not a bad design to put those things into the what I'm calling subconscious. That's not a medically correct term, but to put it into the automated systems, right? Organizational culture is put into the automated system of the system, right?
Right.
It's very hard to change it. The managers aren't in charge of it. And so, like you said, we end up sort of on this momentum thing. And what's happening is we are teaching back and forth to each other the things we've always seen. And so, what I've learned, and a big part of the way I do the work of culture change is to say, we're not going to talk you out of those assumptions, those learnings. What we're going to do is we're going to put in new behaviors today. And those that work will stick in the next iteration, the next cycle of culture as we go forward, right? Because we can do that. And it's actually a very fast way of climbing out of those patterns that we've always done it that way. It's also different than what you see most people do, which is they try and fight it. Right. I'm going to fight the manual. I'm going to fight the
no.
To be this
B
way.
comes before C and D comes next.
Right. And it's like what's amazing about that is, and we've all had these experiences where it's like everyone in the room agrees that it's wrong. And they still can't
nobody's going to do anything about it.
They can't change it, or they try. They sort of commiserate constantly, and they can't do it because it's like deciding your heart rate isn't right. That's not how you change it. It's a different system that's running it. And so we know in my firm and my work how to access that system. And it's very important to understand what you said, which is it's mostly good, right? We don't want to break it. We just want to make improvements to it in the areas where we all look at it and go, that's not working, right? Like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
So is this about empowering people to make those decisions and those changes kind of on the fly?
Yes, and it is. It's a big part of what we need is we need so what I talk about is I call it North American management. North American management, right? We get together. Let's say I'm the boss and I have 6 employees.
Right.
I get my employees together in a meeting. We have a plan from January, and each of my employees essentially makes a narrative pitch to me to say, here's how it's going well.
Yes.
Now, different people and different cultures will spin it more or less. Some will be a little more realistic. Some will be super duper over the top optimistic, right? But basically, I'm having a series of one-on-one meetings in front of everybody else in which the person in the one-on-one meeting is making a presentation to me of the theme, things are okay. That's not a really useful meeting for the other people. People hate meetings. Of course they hate meetings.
And we're going to say it's going okay. We don't want to say I screwed up.
Right. Well, also, so you're saying there, either your peers are boring you to death because you don't care what they're doing, or your peer is lying because you're like, I know what's really going on.
Yeah, the eye roll thing.
Right. And so it becomes this sort of performative dance. Meetings are interesting. Meetings are ceremonial in a lot of companies. Like you watch who walks in, where they sit, who talks first. And if you watch them for a while, you go, oh, this is like, it's a liturgical ceremony.
Right.
Divorced from the reality of what's going on the further you get from January. And
those who sit in the front are in charge.
Right. And who talks in which turn, right? And so I don't love the word empowering because it gets overused, but what we're really saying is, no, that's a set of brains empowered in control of a set of goals and resources. And if we can get that thing to work as a set of brains running a set of resources for the company, interacting with other sets of brains and other meetings running other resources, and we can get that whole system tasked with what's the smartest thing we can do today in light of what we're trying to accomplish. That's a really different look and a really different activity. And it's still called a meeting because there's humans together in a room or on Zoom or whatever, but it's not at all the same thing. And so it becomes engaging, and it becomes interesting, and it becomes a place where I always say it's where we go to do work, not where work goes to die, right? It's where we go to get stuff done. And that's really what it's about is giving people that sort of access to each other and to decision making in whatever meeting they're in, whether it's with,
Mhm.
me, their boss, or whether it's them with their teams,
Mhm.
if they're managers as well.
Right. And it's funny, I had the thought that, and it was a fleeting thought about how things changed with meetings because of Zoom, but they're actually still the same in this process, because you've got your people who are going to participate. You've got your people who are going to turn their camera off. They're the people who normally in a meeting are going to sit in the back. And so you still have those dynamics. You just have them online. And if anything, it's worse, because we're not able sometimes to read the body language and things like that. And of course that can only work if you've got a pretty small group, right? You have more than about 10 people on Zoom. Actually, if you have enough that it pops to they can't all be on one screen, then you have no idea. Really.
That's true in real life too, by the way. In live meetings, we would say 7 to 10 is about the most.
Yeah.
When you get past 10 people, what you are is you're a recommendation forum where you hear recommendations and make like rulings, but you can't solve problems more than 10 people. There's not enough airtime.
No.
Same thing, Zoom. Yeah. No, and the Zoom and the Teams, the virtual meetings are, they're sort of fascinating. Coming into COVID, I had clients that were already doing virtual work because they're multinationals, and they were like, all right, more Zoom, But and then I had clients who sort of moved over, and it really does, to your point about nonverbals, what I think is most fascinating from my perspective is if you take a meeting that was live and you move it virtual, in many companies, not all the companies, but in many companies, especially the kind I'm talking about, North American model, where we get together, pretend everything's fine. It's in the chatter as we're walking out of the room that we do actual work, right? And so when you hit end and everyone's gone and that goes away, all of a sudden now you have this ceremony, but no actual work gets done. And so I'm a weird guy, but whenever I heard, we're less effective on Zoom, I went, oh, your meetings were bad. And now you've taken away the part where you actually corrected for that around the water cooler. And so now you're just, and now you're having a series of bad meetings with no recovery possible. And that's not a feature of how humans have to work together. It's just how you all agreed, tacitly or otherwise, to work together, right? We can make agreements. We can make agreements on Zoom. We can make agreements about camera on. We can have norms, or we can not make any norms, in which case people are free to turn their cameras off, and then we have people that are disengaged, right? So there's there's a lot of room for improvement in those things. I think we tend to sort of, back to our culture conversation, people get caught up into this is how it is, as opposed to, well, what could we change? What behaviors would help us? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you're right. It's that the pre and the post chatter, as they're going in. And of course on Zoom, now it's the private messaging, and heaven forbid that you click the wrong button and, you send your, this is stupid message to everyone, as opposed to, I meant to say, Ed, this is stupid.
On my side, I'm like, please, if you think it's a stupid idea, say it's a stupid idea. But of course, no one wants to do that. Right.
Well, but that really does bring up something that's so important, is we really hesitate to be critical for the same reasons, because this is the way we've always done it. So we don't want to say, really, this is not making sense to go down this path, because we don't want to be criticized. We don't want to be fired, heaven forbid, or, all these other things. And so again, we just keep going merrily down that path, but on our way out the door from the meeting, or, in the Zoom little chats, we're going to be like, yeah, right, nothing's going to change.
Right. No, and that's it. And it's one of the hardest things. I always say, I only know, I'm a specialist, right? I come into these companies. I usually say, I start to make a lot of sense to you when someone puts a note on the fridge that says, don't eat each other's lunch. That's where I start making a lot of sense, because that means you don't all know each other anymore, because nobody eats each other's lunch when there's 5 of them in a room, right? That's just weird. But when there's 50 or 100, now, some of the stuff I do is for even small groups, but the more sophisticated stuff is like, we're talking about there's levels. We can't all get in a room. And so now we've got this situation of like, how have we agreed to work together? And, I always say, I only know 2 things. I know what patterns of behavior are most helpful. I have 70 years of research and experience knowing what they are. And by the book, it's in the book. They're all there. Like, that's the answer. I didn't hide any. And then I have my consulting practice, which is how do we get people to move on to them? Because to your point, it's not easy in a culture that has always said, don't bring bad news, to say, now we're going to bring bad news.
Right.
And so I have little silly tricks like giving out stickers that say, we love reality. And then I have rounds of practice and some more sophisticated things we do. But basically, where I'm headed is, it shouldn't be weird, for if I have 6 employees, for one of them to go, I think we should do this, and one of them to go, I don't think that'll work for me. Like, in fact, it becomes a thing where if I know my employee, it wouldn't work for her or him, and that person doesn't say so, that's a corrective coaching conversation between me and them. How come you're not raising your issue? Right? Like, how come you're not, how can I run this thing well if you don't bring me reality? So, but the transition is not easy. People are afraid of their bosses. They don't say they are. They don't know they are, but it's a lizard brain
we
thing
want to keep our jobs.
they are, it's mammalian, it's reptilian brain, right? You're sort of there between you and survival in some basic fundamental view. And so we want to keep them happy. And so as long as I think they're happier, if I report things are going well, then I'll report things are going well. And I actually, I will directly tell leaders. One of my favorites is the scowl you see on my face is because I am thinking about the ramifications of what you said, not because I'm sorry you brought it. Please know I am grateful and continue to bring me that kind of information. Thank you. Like, leaders need to say stuff like that, because otherwise you go, it's off track, and they go, and the person goes, that means I'm going to get fired. Like, the whole story of, how bad that is gets built up. We got to get away from that. We have to get, more reality.
Well, and it is about communication, which is my background. And like you said, telling people, wow, I never thought of it that way. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And you might have made that I just ate a lemon face, especially if like you've put a lot of time, effort, money, into whatever it is. And it is about encouraging people. Long ago when I worked in corporate America, we had one of those boxes on the wall where people could put their thoughts, right? Put your comment cards or whatever in there. For one thing, nobody ever emptied it, and so people
nothing in, nothing out.
Yeah, right. Well, this is not going to work because the one I put in there 2 years ago is still in there. But, and sometimes people do need to be anonymous, because for whatever reason, they might really truly be afraid of the repercussions, because those are going to happen, or they just don't want to be the person in the room raising their hand saying, you just spent $1 million on this project and it ain't going to work. But it's about, acknowledging that, yes, you do have input. And if you don't like it or what, then telling them that too, saying, hey, Ed, that was a great thing you brought up. Here's why we can't do it, or here's why it wouldn't work. And people are fine with that. They just don't want to think that they got ignored, because then they're not going to do it again.
Yeah, that's right. One of the key things we get into in pretty detail is how we do decision making. And part of that is there's a decider. It's usually the manager, not always, but there's a decider. And we have an issue on the table, and people are teaching the decider what they know, which is different than positioning their idea as best. They're going, this is what I know. If you do this, this will do. You can teach the decider what you think will happen. You can teach the decider emotions. I hate that. You can teach the decider facts. It's 20% reduction if we do that. You can teach whatever you want. If you're the decider, if you're the boss, it's really effective to say, you have just taught me this. Do I have that right? Because people will stop repeating themselves when they feel heard. And then we all agree in advance, before we ever started, that the decider is going to make a decision and then be as clear as he or she can be about the reason for the decision. And that's because oftentimes I'm working with groups of managers. So these people who are subordinates in this room go off and be managers in the next room. And they
so there's, the levels.
Right, they have to carry the message. And it's not enough to say, those screwballs did this thing. They have to say, we as a management team decided this. I don't personally agree with it. Here's why we decided it. Here's what we're going to do. If you continue to find contrary evidence, please bring it to me.
Right.
And in the meantime, you are accountable for implementing the decision, because in this organization, we win by taking turns doing things we disagree with. We do not win by sabotaging decisions we don't personally agree with. So go and do it 100%. Bring me problems. I am always free to bring things back. No decision is ever final, but I can't go back and say I still don't like it. I have to go back with data. So if you find data, bring me. If you don't find data, I was wrong and it was an okay idea. That's fine too. Meanwhile, implement it with your full attention, because that's how we win, is by taking turns. Right. So yeah, it's very different than the sort of, well, I didn't like it, so I'm gonna only half sell it to my team, and they're only gonna half do it, and then that's a recipe.
Yeah, we're gonna I don't want it to succeed, so I'm gonna sabotage it.
Right. If we have that happening, then we can't coordinate, and then what happens? And I meet a lot of executives who go, if I want to make a real change, I have to like run around and push it everywhere. This is hugely inefficient. There are CEOs and COOs and people like that are just stressed out because they can't turn, they turn the wheel and the boat doesn't change.
Right.
And they turn the wheel harder and nothing happens. Like that's a really,
sometimes it goes in the opposite direction.
Right. And so what happens is they get busy looking down, and leaders can't look out to the future when they're busy looking down, right? They're so busy looking down at what are people doing. Now they've lost attention for, like, back to the car metaphor, right? The next tree you're going to walk into, or the next hole in the ground, or the next slippery surface, like where, they can't look out because they're busy looking down. And so a lot of what happens in North American management is everyone's always looking down to try and stitch the pieces together and get the people to do what I want them to do, as opposed to everyone looking up saying, okay, I owe this to the higher cause. I owe this to the higher cause. And how do we, how do you, Deb, you and me who work for the bigger boss, I'm going to bring a recommendation that I get some of your resources. You may not like that. Let's talk about that in front of the bigger boss, or, let's not talk about that in front of the bigger boss. Let's talk real quick before we go in about, can we solve this for the higher level so that we don't put our boss in the seat of having to referee, quibbling children that, I want the resource. No, I want the resource. Right. That's another bad job for executives.
Dad.
Yeah.
It is such a challenge because, like I said, no matter where we're doing this, we have this happen. And, and it's funny because we talk about, acknowledging when somebody is critical. We also need to tell them when they did good. And whether it's, hey, you brought us this concern and it went forward, or, hey, you said this was working right and it is working right, because, you're not going to get that feedback, when people, and we've seen studies, I don't know whether I believe these or not, but the studies that say that, people in many cases, their pay is not the most important thing to them. They're, being acknowledged is. And so, telling them, Ed, you did a great job, or thank you so much for bringing that situation to our attention. That does so much more than, I'm going to give you a raise. And it's funny because we've got, I heard this on the radio today, more labor disputes going on right now than we have had for many, many years. I mean, there's all sorts of companies that are out on strike right now, or, and for a variety of reasons. But, people, it's, they're not feeling heard, I think, is probably the biggest reason why you go out on strike.
It's huge. The other part about that's important. And like I said, some of the stuff I do is managers of managers, but some of it is broadly applicable. And here's one that's broadly applicable. Depending on what research you read, it's the number is between 4 and 20x, and between encouragement and advice. So encouragement is where you tell someone you did that well. Advice is where you tell someone, I need you to do it differently.
Right.
One key difference, it's really important, is encouragement should come right after the thing, and advice should come right before. So if you see someone give a presentation and they did 2 things right and 1 thing wrong, at the end of the presentation, you catch them and say, you did this and this as specifically as you can, very, very well. Here was the result of that. Good job. And then you stop talking.
Right.
And you don't bring them the advice until they're prepping the next presentation, because that's when they're teed up to hear it. Right. So the one thing is the timing, but where I was going before was, depending on the research you read, you need between 4 and 20 times as much encouragement as advice. So if you're not, like, another really good reason, in addition to what you said about people stay for encouragement, they stay for feeling connected, right? Another really good reason, if you're a manager or a leader, to give a lot of encouragement is if you haven't banked your 4 to 20x, and I tend to lean toward the 20x number, but research is spread. If you haven't banked your encouragement and you're over advising, it won't work. They won't hear you. If you time it wrong and you don't bank your encouragement, they won't adjust. And so that contributes to that feeling the executives have of, like, I can't turn the wheel. And it also contributes to just a general frustration, because it lands with the person receiving it as, that person doesn't like me, right? If it's not effective advice, if it can't land as, no, really, just change this, that's what we need. It lands as, I don't get that person, they don't like me. And that contributes to what you're talking about in the engagement space, which is serious.
And I would imagine that what has made this harder has been the companies who stayed virtual. They used to be in offices, and now they're, at least, a hybrid or full-time virtual, trying to figure out how we do all of that, because it's given a lot of people independence, right? To work on their own, to be doing all of these things. And so I think, you don't have the opportunity is maybe the way to do it, right? When we were in offices, you could go bebopping down the hall and stop at somebody's desk and say, oh my God, I meant to tell you, you did a great job on this project. Now we have to either text them, email them, get them, you have to really stop and think about it with all the other gazillion things that we're thinking about.
Yeah, the virtual drives, I think, a level of structure or discipline into meetings, into encouragement, into advice, into one-on-one meetings. Like, I think that you're right, it isn't there. If you're all in the same building, you can be a little loose about those things, and it kind of works out because I see you at lunch anyway, and we talk about it then, right? Or we happen to be at lunch in a sort of a mid-size or a smaller company. We happen to eat lunch with the 5 or 7 cross-functional people. So we just kind of solve it. But, we didn't know we solved it. I mean, we knew we solved it, but we didn't know that was how we were doing it. It just kind of took care of itself, and that's sort of, so you're right. I think the virtualization has put the need for people and companies and groups to get better at the kind of stuff I'm talking about and be more systematic about it. Because if you don't do it consciously, you have less chances to do it accidentally. And that's huge. The other thing that I think that points to is, we talk about culture as being this, subconscious set of behavioral patterns. One of the interesting things about that is people don't always see or recognize or consciously understand all of what the culture is doing for them. And so I've had multiple clients where they were executives who came out of companies that would work in what I would call an iterative management way. And they come out of the company and they're going to take that to the next company. And then a year or 2 or 3 later, they're frustrated.
Right.
It's not working. And well, the reason is what they take with them is what they would of course take with them, which is the most visible elements. So usually in my work, it's meeting rhythm. You have to have regular meetings. It's linked goals. We have to have linked goals, and it's visual graphics, dashboards, right? But what's not visible is what goes on in the meetings. The fact that those goals are flexible and changeable, and they don't match any major platform's goal sale thing. Everyone's selling platforms do goals. They're all wrong because they all say write it for the end of the year.
Right.
And that's not right. They have to have various timelines. And then the data has to be forward looking with multiple futures, meaning it's comparing what I thought was going to happen before or what I resourced for to what I now think is going to happen today.
Right.
And so if you build a bunch of dashboards that don't have that, you have a bunch of meetings that look at the dashboards and talk about them, you don't structure the meetings the right way, and you don't handle the decisions the right way, you've got those same things. You've got dashboards, you've got meeting rhythm, and you've got, linked goals. And yet what that person has brought in is additional bureaucracy. And it's frustrating for them because they keep sitting there going, it's not working. I know what this is. Why is it not? And that turns out to be my value add for those people, is to go, oh, of course you wouldn't have known
this
that.
piece right here. This is the problem.
It was you were a fish in the water. You couldn't see that, but this is what it is. Let me help you with that. And it's like, oh yeah, that. So yeah, the culture, it pulls on you. And when you, part of, what you're talking about when you move to virtual is you lose some of that stuff that was fish in the water, and you can't even put your finger on what happened, but something's different and it's worse. And now what do we do? Yeah.
Right. Well, I want to talk about, this in more detail in a second, but we hear about the companies that are really dysfunctional. Hello, Twitter. And that's just kind of one of those that's going to be a case study for years, right? But what are companies that do this well? And the funny thing is we might actually not ever hear about them. So what are, just a handful of companies that that do this really well?
I won't name names, but what I will say is this: if you look at a space, and you look at the top performers in that space, what you will usually see is it's not just that they're producing something more or better, it's that they're turning faster, right? So they're recognizing what makes it better faster. They're reissuing resources to those things faster. They're shutting down. This is a big thing. They're starting up things that are potentially valuable, and then shutting them down when they realize, oh no, let's put the resources over here. Right. So that's the other thing. In the North American model, once you start a thing and put people on it, like it takes on a life of its own forever. Right. And so that means if I start 3 initiatives, at a top level, that could be 3 products. At a mid level, it could be sort of improvements, whatever. I start 3 initiatives and they start to proceed forward. Now they have people. Now they have resources. Now they have emotional advocates. Right. And then partway in, I'm going to discover that one of those is better than the other 2. Right. And so, there are many case studies of companies who have, failed not because they didn't succeed, but because they had one super successful offering, product, whatever, and they didn't resource it because they were too busy resourcing the stuff that they knew wasn't performing. Why? Because it had advocates, right? So part of what this iterative method gets you, and the answer to your question, you'll see this in the top performers, is they can turn. They sort of know internally, oh yeah, sometimes we move things, and I appreciate that you were attached to that, and we appreciate the work you did. And it was important to get us far enough into that to understand that wasn't the thing. Thank you. And we're stopping that now. So we're going to find something else for you. Find something else. I'm going to move the resources around. We need you over here, so that we're constantly pushing the resources to the right place. My mentor, he had so many brilliant things he said, and this one I hate, but I haven't found a better metaphor. He used to say, starve the weak horses. Like feed the strong horses and starve the weak horses. Otherwise you will starve all the horses, and it's such a kind of a nasty metaphor, but it's not wrong. We have to push the resources to where they are. And so that your top performers, I could name big names that everyone names. Right. That's what they're doing, right? They're picking a product and running with it. And then they're all of a sudden they're like, what's it doing? I pick your favorite tech company, pick a medical company that's, pick a hospital system that's beating out the other hospital systems. Look what they're doing. They're doing stuff faster. They're resourcing improvements, right? That's always the answer.
And they are recognizing this is not working. You
Right.
know, I live in Atlanta, which is where, you know, many big companies are based, but one of the most well-known would be Coke. You know, when they said, "Ooh, we're going to have new Coke, we're going to spend $1 gazillion developing this new formula," and of course, everybody went, "Ooh, yuck, blah, not drinking that." And they pushed it for a little bit more, and I'm sure it was because they had some pretty high up or pretty influential people who kept saying, "No, this is the way to go." And then they went, "Nope, cut and bait." You
That's
know?
an intelligent organization. I mean, you could
Yeah.
argue they could have.
Mm-hmm.
You could. There have certainly been arguments and case studies about should they have noticed sooner and those kind of things. We can.
Right.
You can armchair quarterback that
Mm-hmm.
stuff
Oh,
forever.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you know, the thing I think is so important, and this is kind of a top level shift, I think, in thinking for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
not only at work but in life, is
Mm-hmm.
like it's not a mistake if you go down a road that looks like a good road
Mm-hmm.
far enough to realize that that wasn't the good road.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a mistake. You made the
Right.
best decision you could.
Right.
And then when you learn new information, you made the next best decision you
Mm-hmm.
could. Like the pressure to only pick the right road from the
Mm-hmm.
first fork is what kills
Mm-hmm.
organizations, because
Right.
no one will ever try anything
Mm-hmm.
because they can't be sure it's right.
Mm-hmm.
Where, you know, the more I know I can come off of something later,
Mm-hmm.
the more I'm free to try things. I think this looks good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's resource it to the next step. Let's resource it just for
Mm-hmm.
viability study. You know, let's resource it just for a pilot,
Right.
whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with an understanding that, you know, we do a number of these things.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to shut some down. Nobody on the team failed when
Mm-hmm.
that happens, right? The person who pushed it didn't fail. Like,
Right.
that's what we want.
We
know, we talk
learn
about
from
innovation.
it.
That's what we're supposed to do. This is how your human brain
Mm-hmm.
works. I mean, iteration is not my word. It's
Mm-hmm.
how we model, you know,
Mm-hmm.
flights. It's how we, you know, it's how trees grow, right? They
Right.
grow a little and they turn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is how natural systems work. So to hold yourself to a different standard
Mm-hmm.
is to, you know, again, be divorced from
Right.
reality and
Right.
and how, you know, how your system can actually work.
Mm-hmm. Right. So now there's 5 key practices. And so go into a little bit of detail about each. And you know, because of course we want people to buy the book and we want people to work with you, but tell us a little bit about the 5 key practices.
Yeah. So here's what I'll just do a quick thumbnail. And by the way, iteratenow.com is a great site. There's a video with the practices on there. It's got some videos about people that have used the material. There's a video about what it means to iterate. So there's some good stuff on iteratenow.com. But real quick, 5 practices, really very simple. The first, and by the way, the names don't even matter. It's not like, do you do something you call this in your organization? It's like,
yes.
you do
Are
something that
you
sounds like
doing
this in your organization. Right. Right. Some people go, dashboards. I have a dashboard. It's like, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but do it like this, right? So first one I call output and status broadcasting. That is, managers are walking around saying 3 to 7 outputs they're trying to deliver. They could be various timelines. They're real pieces of work. So, you know, a lot of times you'll have a company where it's like people will be saying, you know, I contribute to revenue. If you're in sales, you do.
Right.
If not, that's not your output. Maybe you put something to the sales team to help them do that. That's your output, right? Maybe you work on policies that help characterize the revenue if you're in, you know, a financial function. That's your output. So what's your output? And it's, you know, saying it, and then it's having a way of visualizing it in a dashboard or something that looks again at that, like, here's where I'm trying to go. And right now, you know, we're on or we're off, right?
Here's
so
where we are.
That's right. And not only here's where we are, but here's where I think we're going to go. So I'm always looking forward at, is there a variance in the future? That's what takes us to the second one I call work preview meetings. These are the staff meetings. And those are meetings about, hey, there's mechanics to how this works, but it's basically the boss going, who has the biggest future variance? Let's talk about that. Right. And so there's a little bit of statusing, like 3 minutes, and there's a little bit of opens, like 3 minutes. And the rest is a structured way of saying, okay, our biggest variance is this. Here's the issue. Here's the problem. Here's what the person with the variance recommends. Let's make a decision and agree, you know, using a good deciding method, like I talked about, as to what we're going to do today to influence that future and how we'll know if we succeeded or not. Right. So what happens is your staff meeting, instead of being a meeting to go listen to your peers lie about how it's going, becomes a meeting to solve the biggest problem the group has this week. Right. That leads into group decision making, which is the third practice, which is, if you're going to do that meeting like that, you have to make the kinds of decisions I was talking about. You have to have a decider. You have to
make the decisions, folks. Don't leave it all boogity.
Make it a real decision every time. You know, I always say, if you're having a staff meeting, it's a 1-hour staff meeting, and you're at minute 26 or 27, and you have not, at a bare minimum, teed up a decision to be made in that meeting, your meeting is a failure. Because
it wasn't a meeting; it was a chat.
It was a conversation, right? Yes, exactly. I like it. It was a meeting in the broadest sense of people are in the room.
Yes, they met.
So yeah, we make the decisions, then we go out and we fully implement them, right? 100%. We bring back data, right? That kind of thing. So that's how group decision making works. By the way, quick plug: voting in small group work produces irrational results.
Huh.
Because managers, all the work that's been done on like lab work on group decision making is like strangers, on a college campus, pull them together, give them a problem, see what they do. Managers have a history and a future together. If you do anything as the leader of a team of managers that sounds like taking a vote or a poll or where people are, people will start to trade votes in the background.
Of course.
And the focus will go from information to politics. So everyone teach me what you know and I'll decide. And when I decide, I'm not going to pay attention to who agrees with me anymore. I'm going to pay attention to what I know. Do I know what you know? And then I'm going to explain based on what you've told me, here's what I'm doing. That's decision making. Fourth one is what I call linked teams. And that is, I kind of mentioned this before, each team works for the higher level of that team. So whatever the goals are of the leader, that's the team goals. So I can't have my 2 employees arguing over whose goals get preference this week. I say to them, no, what we're doing here is my goals. So when you bring a proposal, this is what's best for the top level goals. Then I go to my boss's meeting. And now if I get my goals done, my team has succeeded, but I have not. I succeed when my boss's goals are done. So me and my peers. So that pushes resources across in a very clean way. That's linked teams. A couple other things that happen there too. And then the last one is what I call frontline self-sufficiency. And that is just the bottom of the organization, the people doing the work. They have clear goals. They know what they're supposed to do. They have control of the resources. They have what they need to do it without having to ask for it. And they have self-managed feedback, which is they know how their work is going without their boss telling them.
Right.
And that turns out to be a magic formula. If you give people those 3 things, then they can tell you when you ask them, are you ahead, on track, or behind? They can answer accurately. And so what we're doing there is we're separating a plan, which is what the boss tells the employees to do, with a forecast, which is the employees telling the boss how it's going. In much of North American management, we get confused between a forecast and a loudly shouted plan.
Yes. No, you will do it this way.
If you tell them the plan loud enough, they'll give it back to you as the forecast. We're going to do that, boss. And then you won't get it done any better. You'll just find out later that you didn't.
Right.
So we need to enable the employees to feed that up. And by giving them those 3 things, they know what they are doing, they have what they need. They know how it's going. Then you can tell me this week, are you on track? Are you ahead? Are you behind? And so then that leads into those future forecasts. Back at the circle, top of the circle again, we're back to the first one. So you can have those future forecasts and build those graphs that say, our big variance is here. This is our thing to talk about this week. So that's kind of, and that's obviously there's detail behind those, but that's not a big picture. That's how managers agree together to, this is how we're going to run this organization. We're all going to do it this way. We're going to share when we need to. We're going to make decisions this way. And that's going to allow us to turn and pivot and be some of those top 10, top 20% companies that are better at onboarding information, responding to information, and then adjusting to new information.
Right. You said something just now that I wanted to iterate, and that wasn't the right word. That wasn't what I meant it to say. I wanted to discuss. That was that. See, I get that word stuck in my head. And that's that it's a circle. And you talk about in your book, because many companies are the triangle, right? It's the boss at the top and everything is top down. But in your book, it's a circle. It's this continually flowing type of communication, conversation, process, system, all of those things.
Yeah, the management approach is iterative itself, and all of those 5 things I just mentioned support each other.
Right.
And then actually when we draw the org charts, we also don't draw, an org chart is a box with lines. And that basically says each of these people exists individually to do their goal, and then I, the boss, put them together. What we draw is we put the person's name at the top, we put their names in a row, and then we draw kind of a
squiggledy. Yeah, it was a blob.
That's a team, right? It's a blob. That blob, is important for these outputs, which is the bosses. And then that blob overlaps this blob, which is the next level up. And then that lets us draw blobs across them too, to say this is a cross-functional team, because that's, the other thing is if you get into sort of matrix management, they go, it goes this way and that way. No, it doesn't. Matrix management is a thing because people had an org chart that went this way and they went, it's more than that, let's go this way too. But really, if you look at matrixed organizations, they're not having these meetings and these meetings.
Right.
They're having these meetings and these meetings and this meeting and that meeting and that meeting and that meeting. And
they're going every whichy way.
Right. And so it's like trying to understand what's happening by looking at an org chart with dotted lines going across is like, you're in Atlanta, I'm in Austin. It's like me getting to Atlanta, getting in the rail car and pulling out a map of Austin and trying to drive around. It's not an accurate representation of what's going on. Right. So that's the difference. Is that it's not, it's not top down. It's also not fully bottom up. It's not fully like, there's like servant leadership.
Right. Yeah, we didn't take the triangle and flip it upside down.
It's both, right? It's really fundamentally Western culture likes power over. Traditional management is power over. The boss has power. Servant leadership says no, flip it. But really, it's power with. Right. We are with each other doing this complex thing. What should we do today? What's the next step? Right. That's really what it's about.
Right. But it's important. We still have to have the manager, the leader, the
Still
whoever.
That's right.
That's and because we've all seen, when everyone is empowered, stuff might get done, stuff might not get done. Yeah. I mean, everybody's just going every which way, all willy-nilly. You still have to have kind of that ultimate authority. You
have a decider, right? We have a decider. We know who that is. We have an escalation path. And by the way, we, some of my work says we think it's about 10% usually. Like in that meeting, you're going to make a decision about the future. We're going to ratify the proposal. We're going to do a different proposal. We're going to not decide that today, whatever. About 10% of the time, the answer is we're going to escalate it. We can't solve it here. And so there is a hierarchy in that sense, right? We take it up. And in healthy iterative organizations, even of like, we're talking like 100,000 people nationwide, worldwide, what we see is about a 10-day turn of bottom to top to bottom. So if we discover something at the front line that gets escalated and can't be solved until it gets to the CEO's office, it makes it up, a ruling happens, and then it makes it back down, even for the largest companies in no more than 10 days. Obviously, it's smaller for small companies. Right. But the point of that is kind of to your point from before, people don't need everything to go the way they want, but they need to be heard and they need a ruling, right? So if I go, this is a huge problem and it comes back, it's not for these reasons. That's not my favorite answer, but that's still very much preferable.
It was an answer.
It's a huge problem. And then the system kind of crickets and me going, it's a problem and crickets, right? So it's a much healthier work environment in addition to being more functional, because now I'm going to go, oh, I guess I don't get what I want. I better do something different. Like I have to, it's not my favorite thing, but it's better than no answer. Yeah.
Right. Now here's a big question. When you go into a company and they say, Ed, save us. How do you go about changing that culture? Because in some cases, this might be a culture, depending on the organization you're working with, that has been there 100 years, or a year. But how do you work on changing that culture? And clearly, this is not they hire you and it's fixed by next week. But how do you work with changing cultures?
It's funny because there's sort of various approaches and different organizations have different appetites. There's a lot of different choices. The sort of the two big categories that I can talk to are, one is kind of the more traditional training. So we have training classes and programs. We'll pull groups together and do trainings and things. And we've got some pretty sophisticated, behavioral elements in the training where it's like, you can't just tell people, you get them to do it in some way, and then they kind of take it with them. And that can be, we've had pretty significant experiences where we've shifted entire companies using an organized implementation of training. I had one where we actually, it was a company that was divided in two halves, and we did about 3 years of structured training and feedback. And at the end of it, the one half of the company at the top level, an argument ensued because the one half of the company had gotten so efficient, the other half thought they were cheating. So you can do that. But that takes a while. The faster way, and the thing that I think that we're doing that isn't really being done anywhere else, is kind of like what you mentioned at the beginning. I can work with the executive and a couple levels all at once. And this is sort of one of those things that if you look at the big four consulting firms, this sounds like it should take 2 years and need a lot of slides.
Right.
In a couple months, we can make a change because what we do is we get together and run the company the new way. And so I've got some approaches that we do that. We get together in person or virtually for a couple days. Then there's a period where I'm kind of with the leader in the meeting, kind of helping things out. There's a little pre-work before that. There's post-work after that. And then there's another session where we do a handoff. But basically, usually in the course of a couple months, we can substantively change the way the company runs, because even if the patterns are 100 years old, remember, it's just that they were taught from the last cycle. So it doesn't matter if there were 400 cycles before that or none. We just need to put some stuff in the new cycle that works better, but we have to do it in a way that everyone holds hand and does it together. And that's the thing you see sometimes where someone goes off to training, comes back energized.
Yes, they're like, oh, happens. We should do it this way. We should do it this way. And everybody goes, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the thing we're combating with that. And so that becomes, is it more expensive or less expensive? I don't know. It's more expensive at the moment they write the check.
Right.
It's less expensive compared to taking 3 years to do it. Right. So it's sort of a budget and appetite kind of question. But we can, I've had many examples where we've, I can point to things like I had one where the executive team, pre and post went from working on stuff that was, 2 to 6, 8 weeks out. This was a smaller startup, to working on stuff that was 18 months out. Like nobody said we're going to do this. It just changed.
It just evolved.
Fabric of what they were doing, because they were like, we have to be out here now. So it's that thing about, looking out. Oftentimes in those sessions, they make more decisions in the 2 days with me than they would have made otherwise. So they come in going, how can we give you 2 days? And I go, don't worry. And they come out going, we got a ton of work done. Like we're so far ahead. It's like, because we're doing it the right way. And so that sort of helps cement that.
Mhm.
And then when they go back, they go, we're going to keep doing this, not
Mhm.
because they decide to, not because they're energized, but because we've influenced that
Mhm.
subconscious level of the system to say, oh, this is how we do it now.
Mhm.
So that's the way to do it. And so
Right.
it's not as easy as a week,
Mhm.
but it's also not nearly as hard as a lot of what I read
Mhm.
makes it sound, I guess I
Right.
would say.
Mhm.
I wrote an article once that said changing culture isn't easy, but it's not that hard. Like
Mhm.
it's you just have to know where the system is and kind of where to push
Right.
the buttons.
Yeah, and where to have those tweaks. And of course, the big thing is it has to be supported at the very top. Otherwise it's not going to work. And because I mean that's you have to start working. And now you can go in maybe in little dribs and drabs, and then as you say, you had the two sides. But yeah, if you still got your top folks saying this is how we do it, that was nice, but
well, it's interesting because there's some sort of like called guerrilla work you can do to get it to come up, and actually we have some techniques for
right.
that too.
If you can
It's
show
not ineffective.
success, you
Yeah.
might be able to sway them.
You can do it, but the really interesting thing, and I've had this happen multiple times, is like that was one example, right? So wherever I am, and in multinationals, you have an SVP or something that could be tens of thousands of people, right? So pretty big organizations, but it's still a pocket.
Right.
So first of all, people say, well, if you don't have the big leader, it doesn't matter. And I go, sure it does. Because even when I have the big leader, there's customers, there's vendors, there's the market. Like there's always somebody on the outside. So we take who we have, we work with that. So if you're an SVP or a VP and you've got a division under you, even if it's 50, 80 people, I've done those, take work with that. Now, the second question is, does it then pass up? And this is fascinating, Deb, because you would think, oh, if I work with, let's just take an easy one where I'm one off the CEO or two off the CEO. I work with that person, the peers see the success and they pass it around and they move it up.
Right.
That happens sometimes. Other times, the person I'm working with, and this has happened more than once also, says, oh, I get it. You want the people under me to collaborate with each other to get my stuff done. Let's do it. And then they go to pass it up and they go, if I pass it up, he wants the people next to me to collaborate with me to get my boss's stuff done. And I don't want to do that.
Right.
So I have been implemented in one pocket and then not pushed up. And I feel like, on the one hand, I'm the consultant. So I do what the system wants, right? So
right. Yeah. You can only do so much.
That senior executive is losing out because they don't even understand what they're like in the company where they had a fight. It's like, that's unfortunate because the other side of the company could have gotten that efficient too.
Right.
And instead, the side that got efficient had to tone it down a little to compensate for the misgivings. Right. So, there is power in starting closer to the top, but you can also start in the middle and work up. It just depends on the group.
Right. Right. Now, we do have an international audience. So how does this, we've been talking about North American management, because let's be honest, what happens in the US very much does carry over to Canada, and with management styles and things like that in a lot of cases. But how does this play out globally?
It's really interesting, Deb, because there's different pieces of the sort of the model, the work, the body of work that play out differently. So for example, one of the things I said already is, we succeed or fail together, right? The members of the team succeed when the boss's objectives are done and not when each other, so I get my own stuff done. That's my team's success, but I'm not successful until my boss's stuff is done, which means my peers. So I'm pushing help to them. That concept in Asia is like, yeah, that concept in the US is like, what you mean that I don't want to, so huge, right? Now take a different one. One of the things we talked about on this discussion is if you have contrary information, you are obligated to bring it. So you have to stand up and say, from what I have here, that won't work.
Right.
Here's why. Right. In the US, well, yeah, of course. I do that all the time. In Asia, wait, you want me to stand up in front of somebody else and contradict them? Absolutely not. Right. So and then we can go Israel, for example, right? Different, right? So in different cultures, what I have found sort of anecdotally is there's always an easy one and there's always a hard one.
Right.
And then the other thing that's interesting too is you end up with a question of sometimes the company culture will trump the local culture. So, is it an Asian company in an Asian culture, so it's going to struggle with raising issues, or is it an Americanized company in Asian culture? So actually they're kind of good at that already, but they really need help sort of like an American company. So, there's no hard, fast rules, but it does play out very differently, nationally or globally in different cultures. And it also gets super interesting when I have one staff that's got members from different places. And it's like, well, they're going to have a hard time with this. They're going to have a hard time with that. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, oh my gosh, Ed, we've only got about 5 minutes left. And I think we've just scratched the surface on this
There's
because,
always more.
yeah, my little brow is furrowed. For those of you who are listening, my little brow is furrowed because I'm like, well, but what, and so, it just means that we should chat with you again. But until then, tell us a little bit more. Obviously you have the book, and so that is a great, probably maybe first resource for someone. But how do they find you and work with you, and what are the services that you provide?
Yeah, thank you. So the book I mentioned, I'll do the Vanna thing and I'll put it in front of my giant microphone here. So there's the book. It's Iterate, Run a Fast, Flexible, Focused Management Team. The website for the book is iteratenow.com. And, people are busy and books are long. So if you go to that website, there's a handful of 6, 5, 4-minute videos you can watch that will get you the nuts and bolts of it just right there on the homepage. If you do buy the book, you can register and get some more videos. So you can actually buy the book and never read the book and just watch all the videos. That also works. So that's that. The company is Group Harmonics. So it's groupharmonics.com. And mostly we do various forms of implementation of these practices. Now we do some other sort of team support stuff. Like I said, some stuff is for everybody. Some stuff is really for executives and teams and managers. Okay. But it's really all about getting people to work in this power with mode, getting people to work in this, I hate to use the word collaborative because it's overused, but getting people to work in this like linked mode where it's like we're taking steps together. Some of us are in charge, but we're taking steps together. And the services range from, free videos to training classes to, full blown 2 layers of the company implemented all at once type things. And some of it's standard and some of it's more custom, but we just work with, meet the need we see and go from there. So yeah. And the other one that I'll point out too is I just launched a new TV series on C-Suite Network. We were talking about C-Suite Network, and it's bit.ly/1SS. So bit.ly/1SS because it's called One Small Step. And so there's a couple episodes up. It's a whole year coming up, but that's where I just kind of bust out one of these concepts and talk about, here's a little step you could take with your team if you wanted to.
Right. Well, and what I love about C-Suite Network is you don't have to be a member to listen to the podcast or watch the TV programs.
Right.
So, so that's a great resource. This really has been just absolutely fascinating because it's like we said, it's everywhere. I mean, it takes place in your families, right? You got mom, dad, and 2.5 kids, and the dog that are all, how is this working there? Maybe we're involved in volunteering, all of these various things, or you're the boss, the employee, the whatever, in big companies. So I think this is something that it obviously is pertinent to everyone. So I think we definitely should continue this discussion.
For sure.
So, this really has been, as I said, so much fun, and my little brain is just going, yeah. But that's not a bad thing to make my little brain work. But until we have the opportunity to chat again, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Well, Deb, I'd love to talk again if you like that. That'd be a lot of fun. I've certainly enjoyed the conversation too. So thank you for that. I think if I go to the sort of the 30 or 50,000 foot level for a final moment here, if you read Sapolsky, I think it's called Behave. This is crazy, but there are anatomical indicators for species as to whether they are collaborative or competitive. So you can take a skeleton of an animal and you can measure stuff like ratio of jaw to head size and ratio of male to female size. And you can tell from the skeletons whether the species is collaborative or competitive. And it turns out in competitive species, individual gene lines make it further, but in collaborative species, the species last longer. Okay. So with that as background, you would say, well, what about humans? And the answer is on these markers, humans are right up the middle. So I don't know. So I like to think that means we are at choice as to whether we are collaborative or competitive. And I think we get to decide that in our companies and in our, like, to your point, in our other contexts as well, at home and things like that. And I think the decision, from the company side, I'll take it is, do I want one of my divisions to last longer than the others? Or do I want the species to survive, right? And if we take it at the humanity level, do I want one country to outlast another, or do I want the species to survive? And I think that's, we're at choice in that. And I think, I'm doing a very small part of the work to help us choose that way. You're doing a very small part of the work to help us choose that way. And I think all of us who are anywhere engaged in that are heading in a good direction, because it is really true that we have a choice. And, if we can find ways to make the choice in the collaborative direction, I think it serves us all in the long run.
I love it. So much fun. And, so I've been having a great discussion with Ed Muzio. He is the author of Iterate, Run a Fast, Flexible, Focused Management Team. He's also the head of Group Harmonics. I'm Deb Creer. Until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.